Welcome, iMacros fans, to another episode of At Whim, automating the web with iMacros. Today we're going to take a first look at the newly released iMacros 2021. This is the first release of the flagship iMacros product in about a year and a half. If I'm not mistaken, I think we got iMacros 12.6 in November of 2019. So yeah, that would be exactly 18 months. And the main thing that we're getting with this release is a brand new version of the iMacros browser. Now, for those of you who may not be aware, particularly if you've only ever used the browser extensions for iMacros for Chrome or Firefox, if you have a professional or enterprise edition license, you get a standalone browser that has iMacros baked right into it. So, big deal. What is the advantage of that, you might ask? Well, there's a lot of advantages. First and foremost, since iMacros is baked into the web browser itself, you get certain performance advantages because of that. There's no extension that has to talk to a separate browser process, and so a lot of overhead is eliminated, and you just get a better performing product when it's integrated with the browser like that. And on top of that, you get some additional functionality and some additional features that you don't typically get with the browser extensions. For example, direct screen and image recognition. Some of those features are only available in the standalone browser. Plus, that browser also has a very nice, convenient command line interface. So if you want to launch and play your macros from a command prompt or a scheduled task, that's very easy to do with the iMacros browser, whereas if you want to do those things with one of the extensions, you're going to have to jump through a bunch more hoops, and I'm not even sure, how reliable it is to do that. It used to be somewhat more reliable in the past, but the way to go has always been to use that standalone browser if you want to, use the command line. So the main reason for the new version of the iMacros browser, and this is a little bit more background in history in case you're not already aware of this, but historically, the iMacros browser has been built on Internet Explorer. So basically, it was just a wrapper around the core IE engine with the iMacros automation, thrown in on top. And as most people know, as IE has more or less become obsolete and Microsoft is really no longer supporting it, and more websites today will no longer function correctly, if at all, if you're using IE. That has meant that the iMacros browser has been, let's just say, struggling in the past couple of years with some websites. Now, there's always going to be, well, not always, but there's still a good number of legacy websites out there, especially within enterprises and corporations, where they may still be reliant on Internet Explorer technology and may only work with IE. So you're still going to have some of those outliers, but for most modern websites, the older iMacros browser, the one that the new version 2021 is replacing, was definitely struggling in recent times. And the new browser now is based on Chromium, which is the open source browser used by Google Chrome, Microsoft Edge, the Brave browser, and a number of other browsers. So with this release, the iMacros browser should have no problem rendering all modern websites. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and dive in and take a look. Okay, so let's just go ahead and launch the new browser here. And right away, you're going to see a big difference in terms of the iMacros specific user interface, right? Gone is the iMacros sidebar. And just for comparison's sake, let me pull up the old iMacros browser, 12.6 here. So this is familiar to anybody who has ever used iMacros, right? Even with the browser extensions, that's your main interface right there, is the iMacros sidebar. And the difference here is that it's just built right into the browser with the old browser. But in the new browser now, there's no sidebar, and instead we have this panel down here with a number of different sections. So we have our playback controls, Here's our macro list. And now we have an editor that's built right in here to the browser. If we select one of our macros, and we should be able to see, let's pick this one. So you can just click in here, start editing, and play the macro. It's kind of nice, but it's not really super fully featured. And in full disclosure, I've already spent some time with this version of the browser. I actually had a preview release prior to making this video. And I would have to say that I'm not a super big fan of this new UI. Not yet anyway. It needs to have more options for customizing it for my liking. You can dock it and undock it, but as you can see here, and we can resize, we can resize these panels, but we can't close any of these panels. You can't move these panels around. You just get this horizontal layout. And for me, I just feel like it takes up more real estate on the screen than I would like. But if you're used to kind of how the layout of the developer tools in browsers like Chrome and Firefox are organized, then this may be something that appeals to you. And let me just go ahead and dock this back in. Speaking of developer tools, this is another great thing about this browser now. In the past, if you were using the iMacros browser and you wanted to kind of look under the hood to the underlying HTML, the only option you really had in this browser was to right-click the page and say View Source, and then it's going to pull that up in a text editor, which is not really that great. A lot of times, if I was doing automation in the iMacros browser and I needed to inspect the underlying HTML, I would also have that page open in Chrome or Firefox where I could use the developer tools. Well, now that's no longer an issue because the new iMacros browser is based on Chromium. We can right-click on the page. View page source is still there, but now look at this. We also have full access to the full-blown developer tools. So all of this functionality here, console, everything, we can use right from within the iMacros browser now. So that's fantastic. I'm loving that. So with that said, I thought we would just do a short little performance test, just to see how this stacks up against the old iMacros browser, and let's also compare. We'll even compare it to running against the extensions in Firefox and Chrome. Now, performance is not always the most important thing, right? I mean, it can be if you're doing an automation where you need to process a high volume number of transactions or something like that. Performance is definitely going to be a consideration. But in some cases, it's not that important. In some cases, you need things to go slower or more on the speed of what an actual human would be doing if they were working with a web page or a website. So this is not going to be any scientific test, just a quick off the cuff benchmark to see how it stacks up against some of the other versions of iMacros. And to do that, what I thought we could do is just measure the time that it takes the new browser to loop through the fill form demo macro 10 times. As you can see, just running it once is pretty quick. So I figure we'll get a better measurement if we loop this macro 10 times and then run that test 3 times and average the results. And then we'll do that for the various other versions of iMacros also. So to do this, we're going to start creating just a little script. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and open a command prompt, and then we'll navigate into our iMacros directory. And I'm going to create a new directory here called test. And we will create a new VB script. We'll just call that perftest.vbs. And I want to paste in some starting code here. And also, let me make the font size a little bit bigger. And we'll make the window a bit bigger as well. All right. So this just sets up some basic variables. initializes the iMacros scripting interface right here. And then we call IIMOpen to open the browser. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to be calling this script from the command prompt, and I want to be able to pass in the browser that we want to open and play the macros in. So I'm going to set this up so that we can pass in some command line arguments, and then we'll pass those arguments that we pass into the script directly to IIMOpen so that it knows which browser to launch. So let's go ahead and declare a browser switches variable, and then we'll check to make sure that wscript arguments count is greater than 0, so that we do have arguments that are being passed into the script. And if we do, then we're going to go ahead and loop through those. And we'll say for each arg in wscript arguments, spell it right. What we want to do is tack it on to our browser switches variable here. And we'll add a space in between those arguments. And then let's just trim off that last trailing space once we're done. Okay, now here is where we want to pass in our browser switches variable. And we're not going to specify false to attach to an existing instance of the browsers. We're always going to want to launch a new instance of the browser. Let's just go ahead and set this up for starters to play a single macro. IMPlay. We will play the demo fill form macro. And then we'll close the browser after that. IMClose. And let's just go ahead and test that much out, make sure that that's working as expected. So if we just run this now and don't pass anything in, it should launch the old version of the iMacros browser, 12.6. So let's just go ahead and confirm that and that everything's working. Yeah, so it launched 12.6, played the macro, and close it. And actually, I'm going to close these other instances that I had open previously so that we have a clean slate here. Now, to launch the new iMacros browser, iMacros 2021, we want to pass -ng. And now we can see that the new browser did open, played the macro, and closed it out. So far, so good. Okay, now that we know that that's working, let's go ahead and set up our test code now. And remember, I said that I want to do 3 separate test runs of looping the demo fill form macro 10 times each. So let's go ahead and declare some variables for that. First, we'll need something to hold our test results. And we're going to make this an array with an upper bound of 2 so that we can have 0, 1, and 2 slots for holding our 3 test run results. And we're going to need another variable to, we're going to need to keep track of the total time so that we can average it. So we'll declare a total time variable. We'll declare a variable to keep track of what test number we're running, as well as just another generic loop variable here to keep track of the looping of the macro itself. And so for the first main loop here is going to be for our test run. So we're going to say for test num equals 0 to 2. And the first thing we need to do in a brand new test is take the starting time. So let's declare a new variable for that called test start. Set that to now. Now we set up our loop for playing the macro. So I equals 1 to 10. And this is where we're going to play this macro. All right, so that constitutes one run, just looping that macro 10 times. And now we need to take the ending time. And we want to store the results for this run. So test results, test num. It's going to be the difference in seconds of our starting time and our ending time. And then we also need to add this to the total time. And to do that, we will grab it right from the array where we just stored it. And that's it for that loop. Okay. Now, once we're done all 3 test runs, we need to figure out the average time. And to do that, we're going to take our total time and divide it by the total number of test runs. Now, I could just put 3 here, but I'm going to calculate it dynamically based on the size of our array. So we know that the upper bound of the array is 2. So we're going to need to add 1 to that to get the actual number of elements in that array, which stands for the number of test runs that we have. And that will give us our average time. And what I want to do is we'll just go ahead and echo this out. And we should also echo out at the start of the test, right after we open the browser. So right here. So right here, we want to also, let's just go ahead and I'll echo out the browser switches, so that way we know which browser the test was run in. And I think that'll do it. If I haven't made any mistakes. Let's just go ahead and give it a try now. So let's clear our screen here. And yeah, let's do our first test in the new iMacros 2021 browser. So it's gonna, okay, so there it echoed out that we're running -ng, and it's essentially gonna run this now. It's gonna run through this macro 30 times and give us an average for a 10 loop run when it's done. And I'll go ahead and speed this up in the video in editing so that you don't have to sit here and wait for the whole thing. Okay, so that took an average of 15 seconds to loop through that macro 10 times in the new iMacros 2021 browser. Let's go ahead and run that now, and we'll compare it to the previous version, iMacros 12.6. So that took 14 seconds. So the old browser is 1 second better on average of looping that macro 10 times. So I'm a little bit surprised at that. When as I mentioned earlier, I had a preview release of the new browser, and at one point I ran this test, and it was handily defeating the older browser. But I guess some things have changed between then and release. But still, that's probably within the margin of error, and I would say the two are on par, which is great. Let's go ahead and run this now for one of the extensions, and let's use iMacros for Chrome, since that's going to be running in Chrome, obviously, which is also based on Chromium. Let's see how much of a difference we get when we run this test using the extension as opposed to the standalone iMacros browser. So for that, we just need to specify -cr. And yeah, a significant difference. So we're talking, what, 9 seconds longer than the standalone browsers to run that same test. Again, that just proves the point that there's a lot of extra overhead involved with the extensions that are running external to the browser as opposed to having the automation built right into the browser itself. Now, there's one final test that I want to run here. I want to see how this performs in iMacros for Firefox, but not the current iMacros for Firefox. Let's test it in iMacros for Firefox 8.9.7. To do that, we're going to need to run in an older version of Firefox as well, Firefox 52.9. But that version of Firefox has been one of the best performing, one of the most feature-rich versions of iMacros to ever have existed, and I still rely on it for a number of tasks and projects today. So I'm curious to see how that fares in this test compared to the new standalone browser as well. So in order to do that, we need to specify fx here, but I also need to specify fx path because I need to tell it where my version of Firefox 52 is residing, and that happens to be in C users admin local app data programs. I believe it's ff52 firefox.exe. Okay, and that's the correct path. And let's see how this does. .6 seconds. So that's actually a second and a half better than the best time that we measured so far. So iMacros for Firefox, still the reigning champ when it comes to just raw iMacros performance. But again, the new browser, I'm not disappointed. It's holding its weight with the previous version, and as I said, it's going to be much useful for the vast majority of modern websites out there. And I'm looking forward to see how it improves going forward, especially considering that this is more or less a version 1.0 release of this new browser. Okay, so let's go over the results of that performance test one last time. I do want to make a note that I did run the test for iMacros for Firefox, the current version, and that ran in 18 seconds time. And I was surprised that there was such a difference between that and the iMacros for Chrome test run, because those two are fairly similar products, and so I expected them to perform the same. But I realized that the difference was that in iMacros for Firefox, the current version, when you run that from the scripting interface, the sidebar is closed by default, whereas currently the sidebar for iMacros for Chrome is open by default. So in order to get a more apples-to-apples comparison between those two extensions, I ran another test where I had iMacros for Chrome suppress the displaying of the sidebar when it ran. So it was more on par with the current version of iMacros for Firefox. And so that's why there's a couple extra tests here in this graph. But pretty interesting. So these are all sorted by the best times to the worst times. So as we had already gone over, iMacros for Firefox 8.9.7, so legacy iMacros for Firefox, still the reigning champ overall in terms of just performance. Then we had the iMacros 12.6 browser coming in second at 14 seconds. And iMacros for Chrome, without the sidebar displayed while it was looping the macro, came in right behind the iMacros Classic browser. Then we have the new iMacros 2021 at 15 seconds. There's iMacros for Firefox running at 18 seconds. And then, of course, the worst performing was iMacros for Chrome when the sidebar was displayed, which took a little over 23 seconds. Again, I would expect the performance and just the overall features and functionality of the new iMacros 2021 browser to steadily improve over time. As I mentioned, it's really a 1.0 release, and that might even be stretching it. If you look at the release notes for this release, there's quite a few things that are missing. There's a number of known issues and some bugs that are outstanding that almost makes it feel more like a beta. That may be unsettling for some people, but then again, you have to weigh that against, for some use cases, the old browser just doesn't work anymore. So this is your best option. So you're going to be happy for that. But the good news is that the new browser is not a complete replacement. What I mean is that you don't have to uninstall the previous version of iMacros to run the new browser. So they can be installed simultaneously. So if something's not working for you in the new browser, you can still fall back on the old browser or fall back on one of the other browsers and other versions of iMacros for Chrome. That's always been iMacros' strong point, is you have so many different options in various browsers to get the job done that 9.9 times out of 10, you can accomplish your task, your goal, your objective with iMacros. So with that said, I just want to say thanks for watching this video. I hope you found it interesting. I know this was a little bit longer, but hopefully it gave you a good first look at the browser, and we'll try to do maybe some more deep dives, or maybe cover some of those things that are missing in the initial release, and just take a closer look. If that's something that sounds interesting for you, then stick around here and stay tuned for more tips, tricks, and inside scoop on automating the web with iMacros.